in development. I'm Carl Dye from TriDeck for those of us joining online. Just the packed Bechtel boardroom. I appreciate everybody coming out this morning. Huge crowd turnout. You can't see it on camera, but trust us, it's
The donuts are all gone.
Yeah,
people lining up to try to get in.
that's right. So, like I said, this is our first Donuts in Development. It's work from the TriDeck team. Tracy Zhao came up with this concept. It's really a way that we want to do a job of more frequently and hopefully a higher quality, just talking about the projects and the partners that TriDeck has, the work that we do, how we all work together on economic development, the roles that we all play. And so we'll do these monthly. And for our first one, we're really pleased to have Dr. Steve Ashby, the Director of Pacific Northwest National Lab, here to join us for kind of an annual update. We usually do this during our Economic Outlook Forum, which we're also training the format on this year. But Steve, I really appreciate your time in joining us this morning.
It's my pleasure, and I want to thank TriDeck for the opportunity to give an update on what's going on at the laboratory, but also for all that you and the team does to promote economic development in the Tri-Cities. Thank you very much.
You bet. I will formally run through an introduction.
All right.
Dr. Ashby.
Okay.
So we'll see how well my Idaho education serves me in the meeting.
Oh my goodness.
I just have to put it out there.
Okay, well.
Yeah. Dr. Stephen Ashby is the Director of the Department of Energy's Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, or PNNL, overseeing its $1.5 billion R&D budget and strategic direction. Leading nearly 6,100 staff, he advances scientific discovery, energy sustainability, and national security through PNNL's expertise in chemistry, earth sciences, biology, and data science. Previously, Dr. Ashby served as PNNL's Deputy Director for Science and Technology, guiding strategic planning, research, and technology commercialization.
I could have almost written this myself.
It's ironic, isn't it? You want to be familiar with it. You want to skip that?
Yeah.
I'm ready to read. But Steve, I joke, but from our perspective at TriDeck and from the community's perspective, because really when we say TriDeck, we're really talking about our own community, but we just appreciate the partnership that we've always had with PNNL. And I know some of the things you're going to run through your slides today, we'll talk about the economic impact. And I think that's something that we're all always pretty acutely aware of is, PNNL isn't just this island that's out in North Richland. You guys are so integrated in our community, from all of your team members to the projects to even the research that you look at that has implications on other industries like agriculture, food processing, hydroelectric power, the grid, like all these things. So why don't I just turn it over to you? I appreciate the not running through the whole introduction, but I know you got some slides for us, so maybe we should start with that.
Well, I'll just say, there's one, I'm also Senior Vice President of Patel, which has had the privilege of operating a laboratory in the U.S. Department of Energy. Your stats need a little updating. We're up to about 6,400 staff and nearly $1.7 billion of funding, which our staff have to go out and compete for, just as university professors have to compete for funding. Many of those programs are long-lived. We're one of the larger DOE laboratories, not the largest, but one of the larger ones, with a very diverse portfolio. I won't go through that, but I think in some of the examples I'll show today, you'll get an idea of the breadth of work that we do and the amazing contributions that our staff make each and every day. So with that, I was told I had 3 hours to give a presentation.
I don't know if we have that many donuts.
I had one, I'm good to go. I started here, and I'll try to get through this in about 15 or 20 minutes, just give you an idea, and then open it up for questions both in the room and online. We are celebrating our 60th anniversary. I'll say more about that at the very end as a national laboratory. For those who don't know, there are 17 Department of Energy national laboratories that trace their collective history back to the Manhattan Project. And of course, Hanford roots, and we call that our Hanford heritage at PNNL. And it was 60 years ago that adult Hanford works, but it's today the laboratory was extracted and formed to maintain and advance that science and technology capability that we have. So if you ask what we do, as a national laboratory, we're really focused on some of the greatest challenges facing our nation and society. And at the laboratory, being stewarded by the DOE Office of Science, we're focused at our core on scientific discovery. It's what we do because we're a curious species. So we look to advance understanding in areas relevant to the Department of Energy's missions, right? Once we have that, we're then asking, how can we do that to improve energy resiliency, create solutions for our energy needs, and what do we do to enhance our national security? All right, now those are pretty broad areas that many laboratories could talk about. For us, We have a number of core capabilities, disciplines, if you will, that we're responsible for stewarding for the department. But the four listed in the center really are central to a lot of the work that we do. We're very much a chemistry lab, harkening back to some of the chemistry work that we did all the way for the Hanford projects way back when. Earth sciences, understanding the planet as a system and how it's evolving over time. Biology, there's a variety of things we do, from fundamental biological sciences to biodefense. And then finally in data science. So we've been doing big data for quite a while. I'll talk about some examples in artificial intelligence because everybody's talking about it. I like to say that we've been doing AI longer than people have been lying about it. All right. So if I look at energy resiliency, there's a lot we're doing, really the grid lab for the country. We've been working with other labs to modernize our grid, to help make it more reliable and resilient against natural disasters. We've seen a lot of that affecting us throughout the country. Key part of that is what we're doing for energy storage. And I'll give some examples of that as well. On the security side, again, going back to our Hanford heritage, a lot of it is in nuclear materials characterization and threat analyses. So let me just give you a few examples of the work that we're doing in some of these areas. So let me start close to home. I talked about our Hanford heritage. We're proud of it. We're also proud of our continued contributions on some of the thornier science and technology problems facing the cleanup mission at Hanford. And we're committed to this because we live here. We want to see this cleaned up, and very proud of the progress our colleagues at Hanford have made and the supporting role we play there. This slide is simply showing some of the work that we've done using what we've developed as a radioactive waste test platform to prove the tank side cesium removal. And this is a case where we can go in, study some of these issues and help understand the waste and its characteristics to improve that cleanup activity. If I look at the next area, and this of course is taking advantage of our chemistry. Another example is our chemistry come into play in extracting carbon dioxide. All right, whether it's from a coal plant, from the atmosphere, whatever it is, we can look at creating solvents. They can go in scrubbers and extract that carbon dioxide for later sequestration, all right, rather than let it go into the atmosphere where it can contribute as a greenhouse gas. And so this is an example here where our chemistry is coming to the fore. And one of the examples we've had, one of the discoveries we made is a solvent that can capture about twice as much carbon dioxide as previously known chemicals. So there's a significant advance. We're also advancing biofuels, looking at how can we take renewable feedstocks such as algae or food waste, human waste, and turn it into useful fuels for us. This example is showing how we're often inspired by nature. You're seeing some leaf cutter ants, and they have the ability to go in, chop up those leaves, process it through their bodies, and break down the lignin, which is the hard to break down part of the plants that you want to turn into useful fuel. And so we're studying how they do that so we can reproduce that process ourselves to take advantage of that. Over in SQUIM, I'll just say a completely different example is looking at converting algae, which is abundant throughout the world, into a biofuel. So we've done that. And oh, by the way, when we combusted it, we found out the residue has critical minerals. And in fact, different species of algae will bioaccumulate different critical minerals. We can mine it from the ocean, which no one country can control. And given the supply chain concerns we have, that's a valuable outcome. Moving over to the energy space, now we're talking a little bit about our chemistry work. Here's getting more to some of our materials and chemistry. A lot of work in how we improve batteries. And so we've got lithium ion batteries, all sorts of batteries, everything from our cell phones to our electric vehicles. And the question is, how do we improve this? Remember, the airplanes don't like you putting the stuff in your checked luggage, right? Because after a certain amount of uses, sometimes they can catch fire. That's a big safety issue. One of the things we're looking at is how can we get safer batteries? How can we get batteries that last longer, have higher energy density, and aren't susceptible to some of these hazards? And so here, we've been working with a company to develop some new cathodes and anodes to do these things. And this particular example is a work that we did with Albemarle Corporation, and it shows the ability to look at a new nickel-based battery, which was able to have 0 defects after 1,000 discharge cycles. And so those defects that usually form within the material that lead it to shorting out and causing a fire. All right, and so looking at that, now that might be something you'd find in a consumer electronic or your automobile. If I go to grid scale, completely different use case. All right, for this, I need a battery that fits in here and has long, at least gets me through the day. Okay. When you're looking at grid scale to back up to improve reliability of the electric grid, you don't care that it fits in the side of a phone, right? There, you're happy to have something the size of a boxcar. So that's what flow battery technologies come into play. They're bigger, they're cheaper, and you can deploy those. Now, a lot of them are also based on rare earths or toxic materials. So a lot of the work that we're doing is looking at different chemistries where we can replace those rare earths with abundant materials, get rid of the toxic materials with safer materials. So, for example, looking at one with fluorine. Fluorine is the same chemical used to make candles. Another example is looked at a flow battery where we're using a simple dissolved sugar to sweeten the pot, if you will, and get better battery performance. Once you've got the grid running, now you got to bring AI into it, because you have to bring AI into everything these days, right? But we've been using data analytics and machine learning for years to understand the data from the grid, to give operators an understanding of how that grid is performing, situational awareness, if you will, on the grid. And what's shown is you can see certain patterns emerging that would predict an instability that, if left uncontrolled, could lead to a blackout, right? So you want to intervene. We've developed technologies, licensed the companies, that make it available to utilities across the country. The next step, you're asking, what about using things like generative AI to help? And so here we've created something creatively called Chat Grid, which allows an operator to simply pose the question, for example, what's the generation capacity of the top 5 wind farms in this part of the state or region? And then it'll pull that information out, visualize it in the way the operator can understand and interact with the data to give insight. Right? So that's one example of things we're doing there. And then finally, looking at the wires that deliver all of this, there's a manufacturing technique that we've developed in the laboratory. It's a part of the family of solid phase processing. And to make that real, when you think about, for example, joining 2 metals, what do you usually think of doing? A weld. And in a weld, what you're doing is you're melting the metal and then joining it. All right, so it's going from solid phase to a liquid phase at that melt. When you do that, you change the properties of the material. In solid phase, you stay within the solid phase, and you have certain performance characteristics that are amazing. What we can do is we can take a certain material, add, say, graphene to it, and then press these together without changing the phase and get conducting wire that has better conductivity, lower resistivity, better performance. And in this particular case, when you're looking at transmission wire, a very small % improvement can mean hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to consumers in terms of lower bills. We can also look at these materials for other purposes as well. So it's an amazing technology that we're exploring for a variety of areas. And of course, we're looking ahead. We're very proud of our nuclear heritage here, including what's going on in Energy Northwest and how it's helping us to create abundant clean energy. But looking beyond fission, we're now looking at fusion. There's been a lot of talk about that. We have some of these companies here in Washington State. At the laboratory, we're looking at some of the materials that would be used in fusion reactors and how they perform over time in that kind of environment. So that's work that we're doing in support of the fusion effort. And finally, I'll get to work that we're doing in materials on critical isotopes. A lot of us are familiar with medical isotopes that we use for medical diagnostics, but there's also isotopes play an important role in our national security for various applications. The war in Ukraine interrupted many of those that we're dependent on coming from Russia. We don't consider that such a secure supply chain right now. And so we're looking to increase domestic production of certain medical and national security isotopes, including some at the laboratory. And then we're also looking at natural disasters and man-made disasters, again, the impact what's going on in our line. This is a picture of the Columbia Gorge fire not too long ago. And what we're studying here is when you have a fire of this magnitude, it sends up soot in the atmosphere that then circles around. That actually has a relatively long-term impact as those particulate matter spread across, that's not just in that vicinity. We can have a regional impact, and it can actually have a global impact over longer time scales, getting not just a weather event, but towards climate, that then can have an effect on the next extreme weather event. So understanding that interplay, which is why we have that Earth system science capability, is really important. And then more than man-made, we're constantly under attack, whether it's our grid, our personal bank accounts, from cyber attacks. Here at the laboratory, we developed a variety of capabilities to protect our own assets, those of DOE, of utilities. We're looking at how adversaries might be trying to attack our critical infrastructure and how we might better defend it. In this example, it is looking at a denial of service attack, which is a very frequent form of a cyber attack. And here what we're trying to do is find out, when you're seeing performance, is it indicative of a denial of service attack or just poor network performance? And so coming in here and looking at mathematical measures of system disorder can help you to discern between those two. I'll say, as I start wrapping up here, to support all this, first and foremost, we have 6,400 amazing people who do that research, deliver those advances, and the mission support that helps them do that safely and securely at the laboratory. We also provide them with state-of-the-art facilities. So we've been working with DOE for about $1 billion investment over a decade. Not all this is appropriated, but it's a plan we have, and we've been working steadily towards that. Many of you had the privilege of attending our dedication of the grid storage launch pad. I mentioned that earlier. This is a place where we'd actually test things at scale for companies and other research organizations. We're in the design phase now, so called the microbial molecular phenotyping capability. You can ask me about that in questions and answers if you dare. That's a $122 million facility that'll position the US to be a leader. It was estimated to be a $4 trillion bioeconomy, right? I mentioned isotopes already. This is being fast-tracked for national needs, a $29 million construction project, and additional buildings to support our national security work on campus. And finally, talking a lot about the work that we do, most of which is done here in the Tri-Cities, but we also have about 300 staff in Seattle, mostly working in data science areas, and about 75 on the Olympic Peninsula and DOE's only marine sciences lab in SQUIM. And here we've got some investments being made possible by congressional appropriations, as well as state matching funds for some of these things, and a new research vessel that we've recently dedicated. We're worried about the next generation of leadership, so we take a keen interest in what we do for STEM outreach, bring those people on board, exciting the young people, get them excited about pursuing careers in STEM or in support of STEM. And so here, we in the last fiscal year reached more than 50,000 students through a variety of programs. And we have STEM ambassadors that go out and do a fantastic job of making this stuff understandable to a level that is about a 5th grade level for those kids, which also helps us speak effectively to Congress people. So, and then our community. We talk about what we give back. Battelle is a not-for-profit. Is proud of the role we've had here within the community for all this time. We're your neighbors, your colleagues, and so we give back. And I'm proud of what our staff do in terms of the hours they contribute as volunteers, and then also the philanthropic giving of Battelle, just in this community alone, let alone what we do nationally. And so when you look at the total economic contribution of the laboratory, we have a report done every few years that summarizes this. It's not just what we get in, look at the multiplier, the small businesses we support, the donuts we buy for meetings at the lab as well, the catering that we bring in, all those things. The total economic impact of having a national laboratory in this area is about $2.3 billion, right? Our payroll is just shy of 800 million. Most of that is here. So when we hire somebody, they're good paying jobs from everything from the PhD researcher to the support technician on that project, to the business services, the communications professionals, to the legal folks, to the craftspeople who build amazing things to do all this research. And then you can see construction as well when we build these new facilities. So that is a whirlwind tour of the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and I did it in 20 minutes. All right, so there you go. What I do want to say is, as this plays, We are celebrating our 60th anniversary. We're gonna have a number of activities coming up. We're gonna have a staff event coming up over in Hapo for our staff. We're gonna have a community reception in July. Many of you will take the time to visit with us on that and learn more about our history and where we're going as a national laboratory. So with that, I'll pause and let you be on pause. Or maybe I won't. There we go. All right. So, all right. Thank you very much.
Steve, thank you. So I've got some questions here that we'll get into, but for anybody here today, if you have a question for Steve, just put up your hand and we'll get to you. Same with folks online. If you want to, if you're watching on social media, you can put your question in the comment. We'll do our best to get to you. Or if you're watching on Zoom, you can put it in the comment section. So coming up here in 2025 and starting your 60th year, what are some of your priorities within realizing you just gave us that overlook of the
Yeah, I just told you all about all.
But are there any specific things that are new projects that would be?
So a big part of what we're looking at is still what we need to do in the area of the grid.
Yeah.
All right. And so I think really looking at what we do to continue to make it affordable and reliable. So the grid is about 100-year-old machine. It's been called one of the greatest inventions of mankind, and it's served us for over a century. But think about when it was initially designed and how it's evolved over time. All right. Unlike other places where you say, I'm going to shut down for a couple of months to do a retrofit and upgrade. We don't just shut down the grid and say, well, we'll be back online in a couple of months. Don't worry about it, right? So it's had to evolve while it's still running. And the things we're now asking it to do, we never dreamed of. Incorporate different types of energy sources, do it more reliably, do it with less capital investment to keep the cost low to consumers. All those things are difficult. At the same time, we're trying to get more information from that grid. We can operate it better. It's got under attack constantly, so we're defending. So all those things we're doing to allow consumers to have more control over their use of electricity and control the costs, keep those costs down, but then also just make sure we have the electricity we need in a reliable and secure fashion. So that's a big emphasis. I didn't go a lot into the work that we do in national security, but a big part of what we do is in nuclear nonproliferation. And so we all know about our own nuclear arsenal that we have to maintain for our strategic defense. And the Department of Energy and our labs have lead responsibility for that. We play a small supporting role in that. But there's also a place where we lead, which is understanding what other countries are trying to do in terms of developing their own weapons, right? And so you read about North Korea or Iran, right? And so understanding what their technical capabilities are is part of the national labs do, and PNNL is a lead lab in understanding their capabilities and informing U.S. government so that they can act appropriately on that. I look at some of the things we're doing in the basic chemistry as we're looking, everybody's reading about the rare earths, the precious metals coming from places like China, where perhaps we don't have the most of a secure supply chain. What can we do to find earth abundant alternatives to these, whether it's from the ocean, as I mentioned earlier, or from our own continental US mines, right? And so those are things we're looking at. How can we get catalysts which transform things to act faster, more efficiently for cost-efficient production and manufacturing? What are things that we can do in terms of the batteries I mentioned, but moving into other areas, you're looking at computing. It's not just AI and how we use that, but it's also just the computing itself. So we're working with other labs on advancing new types of computing, quantum computing, all right? When that's finally realized at some point, it's going to transform how we do computing in the world. And we think it's a great combination because the killer app for a quantum computer is quantum chemistry, which underpins some of the things I was talking about. I think those are big areas. And then in AI itself, this is where a lot of the labs are looking at it. And how do we use that to improve our operations, to accelerate our science? And that's where we have a partnership with Microsoft to look at how, their goal is, how do we do the next 250 years of chemistry and material science discovery in 25, right? How do I accelerate human ingenuity using artificial intelligence? Not take it out, but augment, accelerate. How do we automatically defend the grid against these attacks that are coming? They're too fast for humans to respond to. So those are some of the things I think that we're working on.
So with this being PNNL's 60th anniversary, can you give us a little history of like the national labs in general? Because I'm even thinking of like, President Carter just passed away, and thinking during his administration, he actually created Department of Energy and maybe kind of put the labs into the modern format we have today. But like how did it start today, and how did PNNL start and that Hanford legacy you talked about?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So the national labs predate the Department of Energy. All right, so we trace all the way back to the Manhattan Project. And so everybody's familiar with the important role that Los Alamos played in designing and putting together that weapon. And of course, Hanford played a role in producing and processing the plutonium needed for one of the weapons. And Oak Ridge played a key role in the uranium. So we had two different weapons that were used, right, to end, win that war. When that Manhattan Project came together, and I encourage you, if you don't know this history, take advantage. We've got a monument here in our own backyard, right? The B reactor and all that, to learn more about this. It's really remarkable what we did back then. But the nation assembled the Manhattan Project, some of the brightest minds, scientists and engineers that the nation had to offer. Said, we're going to pull those together in a unique way for this particular effort. They did that. And the initial plan had been to say, thank you for your service, go back to what you're up to for the war. But instead they realized, holy moly, look what we've created. Let's keep it together. And that led to the creation of the national labs. So you started seeing that early on of saying, we want to do this. The notion of having a university or private companies coming in and running these things for the government, all right, is led to this. And over time, we went from Los Alamos, we had Lawrence Livermore, we had Oak Ridge, we had a number of labs, and there's actually a timeline history that's very nice. We have to make sure we make that available to people to see that traces this history. And so along came PNNL in 1965, when we pulled out of Hanford. That's our history. When President Carter formed the department, that was a major step forward in terms of how we created and were stewarded by different parts of the department. There's single program laboratories. There are multi-program labs like PNNL, and they're very large laboratories, the weapons complex. So we work together, we compete. And fast forward, it's now 8 decades we've been serving the nation. And what we're responsible for is stewarding these capabilities, these people, facilities, and applying them to the priorities as defined by the president and funded by Congress. And we've been doing that steadily over these 8 decades.
Yeah. Before I came down here, I remember talking to a colleague I worked with at Idaho National Lab, and I remember her expressing she was kind of jealous really about the portfolio of research inside of PNNL and realizing the different roles that they play. I just thought that perspective was just reinforcing what you just said, right? That the breadth of different types of research that PNNL has versus those single mission labs it's a significant difference in the world that you guys live in. Right?
Yeah, our portfolio, if you're looking at a pie chart, is pretty broad across all 3 mission areas of the Department of Energy. And although most of our funding is from DOE and the NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Administration within DOE, we get funding from a variety of other agencies. If you looked at the pie chart, you'd see that about half the laboratory does national security work. So it's not just for the NNSA and that stewardship, the non-proliferation capabilities I mentioned, but also work that we do for the Department of Homeland Security, the intelligence community, DOD. Those folks collectively fund about half the laboratory. So it's a complex funding mix. But what it does is it gives us an opportunity to leverage capability over multiple needs. And when you do that, what you learn on one project over here, suddenly maybe 2 or 3 years later, or 2 or 3 months later, we'll say, hey, I did something over here. Maybe it's relevant here for this sponsor. And it allows you to get much more impact for taxpayers' dollars, the research that we're doing at the laboratory. So
that's great. I think one thing we really wanted to delve into, and you hit on it a little bit in your presentation, Steve, is really, the economic impact the lab has, not just from a dollar point of view, the federal investment that comes here and the payroll, but that multiplier effect as it goes on. And I was just thinking of, I think a lot of times here in the Tri-Cities, we take the lab for granted, but the impact that you have on all of our services because of the work that you do and the workforce you have, even something like the airport, right? I mean, have you guys ever tracked how many flights, pays for to bring people in, to bring companies in, to work on research, other researchers, and then your researchers obviously traveling throughout the country. But you're probably, I'm just guessing, a significant chunk of our.
Well, I know when I'm flying back, sometimes some people joke sometimes the flight coming in from Salt Lake or Minneapolis is the PNNL flight again.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of people on those flights and a lot of road warriors going out and staying in touch with our sponsors and collaborating. So a lot of times, in fact, I'll be heading out to DC where a new secretary, Chris Wright's been confirmed and he's taken charge. If you have a chance, read his statement and watch his town hall where he introduced himself to DOE. It's very inspiring of what he wants to accomplish during his tenure. He's going to meet with all 17 lab directors for 4 hours next week. And then have dinner with us. I don't know who's buying. So we'll find out. But I think that'll be an opportunity for us to understand where he wants to go with these laboratories and how we can support his priorities. But as far as travel, there's a lot of travel going on. We bring a lot of people here. You talk about the impacts on the airport. I don't know how many flights, but we're grateful to have an airport. I get to see a lot of them. I like ours. It's convenient. It's well run. We're getting more and more flights to different places, which is great. And so we bring people in, whether they're interviewing for jobs, collaborators visiting with us to do science. All these people come into the area. So you got to fly a plane in here. They have to have a room to sleep, bed to sleep in. So they're renting rooms that are increasing hospitality sector. They're buying dinners and eating, enjoying our fine red wine.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
So I think that is an impact that we offer in terms of bringing people in.
Yeah.
And then frankly, we've got a lot of people experiencing the Tri-Cities and knowing why we like living here. Joe has a question.
Yeah, what would you say is your biggest challenge in attracting and retaining your talent at the lab here in the Tri-Cities?
I think it's the meta challenge is often for some of the top talent we're looking for. It's a competitive work environment. So I have to compete against industry for, cyber computing and computing talent. That's hard, right? Regardless of where you are. I think that in the Tri-Cities, there's a lot we offer that's very attractive as far as the quality of life. Frankly, the people are used to the big city and they want more in terms of some of the cultural activities, performing arts, things like that. This may be a little less attractive to those folks, but I know there's efforts here to look at expanding the arts and that community, part of the community is vibrant and attractive to us. I think one thing, and this is why I've been an advocate for this, is what we're doing to make the Tri-Cities more welcoming to a host of people, all right? And I think the more we do that to get people to say, hey, this is a place where I want to come, I want to raise a family. I see a variety of things. And so I think the more we can do to broaden our appeal to a range of demographics, right? From the more experienced workers I need to the younger folks, right? What they want, the kind of life and style they're looking for. There's a number of things there. So it really depends on the person we're recruiting. First and foremost, people come to a national lab for a career and the mission impact they can have. And so I don't have trouble getting a lot of the top people from around the world come to Richland, Washington, because they know if they want to advance their careers, they're going to do it at PNNL. Hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Hey, sir, Greg Smith with Burns McDonnell. You mentioned the new energy secretary, and I listened to his work. It definitely seems like he'd be an advocate for national labs as well, but Hampered, which is great. I was wondering if you see any potential changes in the priorities that PNNL and the mission sets based on kind of what he has shared.
So it's a little early to tell, right? So anytime you have a change in administration, and so this is my 41st year with DOE, so I've seen a few of these things, going back to the graduate student, all right? So, and in management, about half that time in the more senior management roles. So I've seen a number of these transitions, and I'd like to tell staff, look, every 4 years we go through this. And even if Vice President Harris had won the election, we'd have a lot of changes, okay? And like, everybody's calm down, let's feel where things want to go. There is a lot of change going on right now. As the president, makes clear his priorities, and then the secretary will implement those with respect to the Department of Energy and the labs. Part of why I'm eager to have that meeting next week is to understand firsthand what he envisions for us. He laid out 9 challenges. Don't quiz me, I don't have them all 9 memorized yet. But several of them are around innovation, around the grid, around, in his opening remarks, talked about computing and AI. So there's a number of things that I think are right up the alley of the national laboratories. If you watched his testimony early on, he called out the laboratories early and often. He called out PNNL specifically, and so he's committed to visit all 17 labs in 2025. That's quite an ambitious travel schedule, we'll see, but so I'm pretty optimistic and about that. And if you look, one of his 9 challenges does acknowledge the obligation the nation has to clean up Hanford as well. Hopefully answered your question. So thank you. Yeah.
Hi, Loanne from United Way. I know that technology commercialization has been a priority for the national labs. Can you, and for those of us who live in the Tri-Cities, sometimes that's not really visible. Can you cite maybe a 1 or 2 stellar examples that we would understand of how the innovations at the lab are really been commercialized and we can see them in action?
Okay, so since it's our 60th, let me go back in time. And this is actually maybe more of a Patel invention, but how many remember what a CD is? I don't mean certificate of deposit. Right? So compact disc, right? It's now dated. That technology was invented in Richland by a Patel scientist. If you look at going fast forwarding a bit, I won't, the camera's at a certain level, so I'll do it. How many have done the PNNL salute speaking of the airport? Right? You did list at the airport.
Yeah.
That millimeter wave technology was invented at PNNL. And you'll be happy to know that in testing right now is a version where we integrate a shoe scanner. So you keep your shoes on. So you step in the thing, it twirls around, and out you go. The next generation, this is way cool. How many remember, now I'm dating myself, Schwarzenegger in the movie Total Recall? All right, when he lands on Mars, he walks by the wall and sees the weapons on him. Is that scanning? So we're having one where you can just walk through and scans as you walk in a normal gate. So those are technologies that are keeping you safer at airports around the world, developed after 9/11. Fast forward, there's things that may not be so visible in terms of some of the chemistry we do. That's in, this is now data that's been supplanted, but when you, this time of year, you go on an airplane, what happens? You get de-iced. Right, we worked with a company, Archer Daniel Bindon, to develop a bio-based propylene glycol that was used for de-icing. It's now out of production, but that was one example we did. Thing when you're looking at some of the battery technology that you'll have in the future, it'll be safer and better because of PNNL innovations. So if you're a scientist and use something called a mass spec in your laboratory, most commercial mass specs have technology invented at PNNL. In it. So there's a number of things here. I don't think mass specs are at home used that much.
Thanks.
My question is kind of just focused on energy storage, since you touched on that as one of the major points. It's such a minute portion of our current grid, even in planned deployment at the moment. Where do you see that technology grow? Kind of what is that trajectory as far as you see in actual applicable use and deployment in the coming years?
For grid scale?
Yeah.
All right, so again, I'm not an expert in this. I got colleagues who are, but what we're looking at is increasingly deploying large scale, long duration batteries in lieu of having, say, diesel generators as backup. Right. So right now, most of us, if you have expensive TV or computer, right, what do you have to connect it to before the wall? UPS, right? Universal Power Supply. Gives you clean power, protects your electronics, right? So if you have interaction with the grid, right now you have batteries that can back that up to some extent to keep things on an even keel. What you'd like is longer duration, only be from hours to days to seasonal, all right? Then you can really look at having impact where you can not have to overbuild the grid for peak usage, right? Here we have very hot summers. Cold winter right now, but hot summers and our electricity use goes up. All right, if I had better seasonal battery technology at the grid level, I wouldn't have to build for that peak. I could build at a lower level and have the batteries take care of those peak days, which we don't have that flexibility now, which is causing a little bit of a problem for our area, right? So I think that ability to go to longer duration is going to be the key to see greater penetration of grid scale batteries into the grid and replacing some of the generators with batteries instead. We answered your question.
That's a good point to bring up. I know Franklin PUD here locally actually has an initiative to add even existing battery technologies, which might be lithium ion, but at a grid scale. And what they're working on, what they've shared with us is that they're doing it, just to your point, Steve, about resiliency. So like in some type of power outage, an emergency situation, they want to have it actually portable that they could, depending upon where the power's out or they have an outage within their grid, they could transport it, provide some power backup for a short period of time with existing technology and even peak shaving. So,
Right.
you know, in those winter and summer months, that's, I think we've had this discussion many, many times. What we've learned is that, you know, you have to build the grid to whatever your peak's going to be. You know, average doesn't really matter because if you miss it on the peak, that's when everybody wants to have their air conditioning or their heater on. And so, you know, using some existing technologies, they're even looking at ways to do that. They were pursuing some grant funding that we worked with on, but it's a great example of how you can integrate that technology, you know, really into our grid.
And that's a direct benefit to the ratepayers, right? Because if a utility has to invest for that peak,
Yeah.
that's a capital expenditure, a very expensive one, and we're going to pay for that through higher rates. So we can use these technologies and get long duration batteries instead to shave the peak, as
Yeah.
you said, it results in cheaper energy for all of us.
Yeah, oh, exactly. And on that point, I just saw our own Sean O'Brien walk in. Sean, one of the co-chairs of the Tri-Cities Legislative Council this year. We just had our legislative day in Olympia, great representation from the lab that was there. But I know that one of our community initiatives on a legislative ask this year relates to funding for Battelle and for the lab relating to grid resiliency. And Sean, I'm putting you on the spot, but can you queue up that question or like that priority as far as it relates to that lab? And maybe Steve can take it from there.
Yeah, excuse me. We, this year as a legislative council had 5 priorities from around the community. And the first on the list was Battelle's effort on the, and that you are putting on the spot, Carl. 'Cause
Sorry.
A regional analytics center.
There you go. I should
All right.
ask you the question because I forgot too. I'm not-
That, the energy resources test bed, is that, I know that we've had lots of different needs on it, but as you could probably talk better about what all that includes.
Yeah, so what Sean and Carl are trying to ask me about is, so we have this ability, I talk about the grid a lot. One of the things, if you came to campus, you see we have a room this size where we have a bunch of displays where we can monitor the performance of the grid and test out new software that allows us to look at how it's performing. And we've been doing this from a national perspective. And for the nation, the grid really is comprised of 3 major interconnects: the Western, the Eastern, and then Texas, all right? And so trying to understand each of those interconnects, right, is an important part of what we do. And looking at layering at different parts of generation, distribution, cyber, all these things come up, and that's a big model that we've been developing with our labs for several years to give us a better understanding of the grid at a national scale. Now, what we realized is, of course, you can look at it at that scale and the interconnect, but what if you could pull it down and look at it from a regional scale, which is where things start really happening? And we can pull it down even to the state. And so we said, what we'd like to do is take this, which is a national planning capability, and make it more relevant to regional planners or to state planners. For Washington State, for example, we have certain laws about energy usage. How do we work with utilities to better plan and look at what different scenarios, trade-offs they'd have to make in meeting those laws and doing this cost effectively and reliably? And so what we propose is that we could leverage that national platform and now bring it down to a regional or state level and create a regional analytics capability. And what we've asked for is state of Washington support in doing that. And that would then give them a seat at the table where you could bring different stakeholders together and say, all right, here's the questions we're interested in as Washingtonians. All right. And now since we put money in the game, skin in the game, we now have the ability to ask those questions in addition to what the federal government wants answered using federal funds. So we're trying to leverage that and bring that capability so we could ask, what's that trade-off between a wind farm here or a solar farm there, a new nuclear power plant here, all those things coming together and really allow us to look at the energy system as a system, as opposed to looking at each of the silos. And by doing it from a regional and state perspective, we can serve the state of Washington's interests. So that's that ask there. Did I stumble on a reasonable answer to your question?
That was a much more reasonable answer than our question.
Get another question over here.
Yeah.
I'd say the kind of follow-on question, but, is, that activity that PNNL is doing, is that kind of independent with PNNL and Washington State, or are you guys working closely like with BPA as well? So I would assume like they would have a lot of input and ideas on how you could build the grid, especially talking about new generation sources and stuff like that.
So historically, we've had a good relationship working with BPA, but also the utilities around the state. Right, and so you look at that, we've got great partnerships, and Judd Verdon, who heads up this part of the lab for us, has done a wonderful job along with this team of building those partnerships with the utilities, with BPA and others. So we understand where they're coming from. One thing we pride ourselves in the lab, it's not just here, but in general, is we do some great research. And as I said, part of that is just to advance our understanding of certain things. But another part is we also want it to be useful research. And so that ability then say, all right, how do I translate this into a product or a service that matters? So we look at, how would you use it in the field? Right, so I gave the PNNL salute example, right? That thing's got to spin once, you got to get out of there. You can't wait 10 minutes for it to do the analysis, all right? And so when working with this, we're really trying to understand from the utilities perspective, the vendor to support them, what do they need? What's useful for them? Rather than just trying to push a bunch of, academic research ideas at them, right? So understanding how it's really used in a practical setting is what we do, whether it's the grid, national security, or other settings.
Maybe to follow on to that, you talked about some of the research you're doing, I think adding graphing to copper wires and conductivity and stuff like that. We've heard things on the previous administration, grid modernization, kind of reconductoring high voltage transmission lines. Are there other things within either the basic science side or the applied science side, Steve, that you guys are working on for that? To your point, energy grid, electrical grid technology is like 100 years old. I don't know that really there's been that much change in transformers or conductors or wires. Are there other things that you're working in that sector besides the storage, but then even on the science that can affect and make improvements to the grid, resiliency, efficiency, any of those things?
So there's so much going on in this area. I don't know all of it, but besides the energy storage, certainly looking at reconductoring, so replacing the wiring. That was an example I showed. That's one case, and that's got many other benefits. But sticking with the grid, for example, increasingly we're attaching inverter-based devices to the grid, right? And so when you're adding these things, you're adding sensors to the grid, and you're doing all this stuff. That's a completely different way of using the grid than it was ever envisioned. And so now the questions are, how do I control all these things? Now I get into mathematical control theory, right? And so that's a big part of basic mathematical science and control theory that we're looking at. How do we adapt that to a grid? It's no longer a single centralized monolithic entity. It's becoming increasingly distributed and decentralized, and yet you still have to have a central control over it. So how do you manage that in a way that keeps it reliable and secure? The whole issue of cybersecurity comes into this, and that permeates a lot of other areas where we're looking at making fundamental mathematical advances to understand and improve cybersecurity. So these are a couple of things where I would say that basic research and security of the grid and in the control of the grid are things that our power engineers and computational people are collaborating on to understand and advance.
Going to shift gears on you here. You talked about recruiting globally for talent, but one of the slides you shared talked about the STEM programs that you guys have put together and have kind of deployed not through just local schools, but then statewide and even nationwide. But you talk a little bit about that, because obviously recruiting is one part of it, but then maybe growing your own reflects kind of the lab's vision on working with younger talent and develop even in that passion and that interest in science. Can you talk a little bit about the STEM programs?
Yeah, sure. So this, so we have a very robust intern program in the laboratory. So last year we had about 1,700 undergraduate and graduate students at the lab. So that's one end of the STEM pipeline that we focus on. And there is a number of programs, a variety of ways in which we reach out and just try to bring people in, get exposed to the laboratory, and then mine that pipeline for future employees. At the other end, you've got your K through 12. And what we're doing there to get these kids more interested before they lose interest in middle school, right? And drop out and say, I'm not interested in it. And so there, we've had a number of programs for years where we've worked with local teachers to develop a STEM curriculum for that age level, or that grade level. We work with them to help them be better teachers at STEM, right? Because you got teachers coming into those classrooms, he or she has to teach a variety of subjects. Maybe a person's training with STEM, often not. How do you help that person equip him or her with the tools needed to teach it in an engaging way that people will say, oh, science is hard. It should be science is cool. Science is interesting. I want to do that as they get older. So that's one thing we do. Another thing we do is outreach with our STEM ambassadors. We take our own staff, usually in the earlier career portion than me, who have the ability to relate to these kids, and we created games. How does a nuclear power plant work? It's a board game, right? We've created all these different games to engage the kids at different age levels in doing this. So that's a big part. We've worked with WSU and UW in different programs that they run, support their activities across the state. And of course, Battelle, a big part of our philanthropic mission is supporting STEM education throughout the nation.
Yeah, I think all those things mean so much because, it's one thing, like we said, to recruit, but then how do we grow our own? And then I think you guys do such a good job of integrating into the community, like we said before at the outset, that Battelle and PNNL aren't just this island out north of Richland. You're really integrated in everything. I mean, even from the people you're recruiting in need a house to live in. So, the impacts on construction. Yeah.
Our students are all in the rooms.
Yeah, maybe a couple. I'll see what I can do. Everybody's happy to help out. But that impact on the community is so, so great. It's only grown in the 60 years that the lab's been here. And I think that's a great point that we want to keep on bringing out, is that it's not just this federal investment coming in, it's how does those dollars and those economic impacts affect all of us, really, from the lab's perspective and from the community's perspective.
Well, certainly, I mean, we come here, and I think hopefully the community takes pride in some of the things we do at the laboratory. We take pride in being part of this community. And so, yeah, we recruit somebody here. But that person often has a spouse or significant other.
Yep.
Then you may have kids involved, and so now it's becoming part of the neighborhoods and sports teams and all that stuff going on. And so you've got that economic and driver. You've also then got what they're giving back to the community in those activities. That's a big part of it. You're right. They're buying houses and dining out at restaurants. And so all those things help contribute. I think that having an employer the size of Battelle here with the National Laboratory, as well as what goes on in Hanford and all the other, Energy Northwest, all the others, this pulls in a lot of people, and then it keeps attracting. It's a nice virtuous cycle that feeds on itself, bring it in. A lot of people sometimes say, well, when I work with Trident on economic development, we're looking at attracting a new company here. And, I'm saying we need more high-tech companies in here. And somebody said, well, aren't you afraid about the competition? No. I'll compete for talent, and I'll count on our ability to win a good share of it. But the more people we get, of varied backgrounds, different things, especially on the high tech, it helps the whole community, right? And so if we can then support a regional arts center, if we can then support, higher end restaurants, so we can support more of these activities, that just makes it easier for me to recruit people.
Yeah.
And so working with Tridec, Visit Tri-Cities, the Chamber and others, what we're doing to make this a destination for a variety of employers, who employ people at all skill levels and in a variety of industries, is really important, because it makes the community more attractive and people I do need to keep at the laboratory. You talk about upskilling our staff constantly. We have to stay on top of what's the latest developments. We have training programs for those folks, and all that involves us going out in the community and doing things as well.
No, it's a really great point. An article that I read last year sometime, that around David Reblog had, and some stuff he got from his mom, was an article that was in the Tri-City Herald in, I think it was 1983. So So TriDeck was formed in 63, so it's our 20th anniversary. And so Sam Volpatest, who, was one of our founders, wrote this letter to the editor for the Tri-City Herald. And it was just interesting because he talked about how far we'd come into all those areas. And, at that time in 1983, I don't know, Brandon, you're pretty young back then, but people have described the Tri-Cities as a miracle in the desert, right? Like, why would you have these things that we have today, but even 83 now is 62 years or 42 years ago, sorry. Looking back, we've come so far in the last 42, let alone that first 20 where we all started, but all those things are so important for all of us. My own experience with Tri-Cities was just like driving through town, going from Spokane down to Portland 30 years ago. And I didn't really know how great we were until I came off the highway. And so I think that's so true for many people, whether it's regional travel is coming through, where it's people you're trying to recruit, young families that you're trying to get into STEM. There's always more that we can do. We've come a long ways. We've got a longer ways to go to really build on the fact that, everybody talks about it. We do have the highest percentage of PhDs, in any local communities. PNNL is such a huge part of that. But how does that translate into the connection to all of us? And to your point, making the Tri-Cities, continue to make the Tri-Cities a better place to live. It's really important for all of us.
Agreed, 100%.
We're getting close. We're down to 4 minutes. I do want to give, besides everything else we talked about, a shout out. Your different departments have led us to some great connections that we've been able to have some success with this year. You partner with us on introducing us to companies that you bring in. And a couple of companies, both on the fission and fusion side, were leads that came from PNNL last year. One of them is actually, we're looking forward to a fusion company that we're hopeful, for some programs that could lead to that material science development that you're talking about, Steve, that, the fusion technology could help in testing, developing new materials that we need both for splitting atoms and also bringing atoms together for energy. But I want to just talk a little bit about fusion. It was one of your slides that you talked about, but the opportunities with fusion.
Let me, one more general statement. I was asked about tech transfer as well earlier. I said, there's a lot of stuff we do in technology development that then to get it out to have an impact, we license that technology. And sometimes some of our staff is spun out to great companies, all right, but and so we're proud of that. It's one way in which we can get our ideas out of the lab and toward into the community to create wealth and jobs for Americans. And so when we bring these companies, we're happy to be able to do that. I think we should be able to do more of that than we are. But in the fusion case, that industry is just starting to try to establish itself. And there was a major breakthrough by Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory not too long ago in really demonstrating energy gain at some level, and that was the first time in human history we've done that. And once you have a breakthrough like that, then it starts feeding on itself. There's different technologies, approaches to fusion that different people are looking at, including the companies that you're talking about. Our contribution here, we think, is helping them to understand the materials properties, do some of the modeling of these things. We've been asked to look at even the regulatory environment. How is it different for a fission reactor versus a fusion reactor? Would be fundamentally different. So we're eager to see this. I mean, it's one of those things that when, not if, but when it pans out, not betting on electrons next year, but when it pans out, it'll be game changing the same way that when quantum computers eventually deploy, that'll be game changing for humanity. And I'm not being hyperbolic. If we can get fusion energy, quantum computing, these are game changers for the human race, right? And so if we can figure this out with fusion, that'd be fantastic. And the fact that we got some of these companies right here in Washington State is great. And PNNL is happy to partner with them where we have something to offer.
Well, partnership's the theme of the day.
Yep.
We truly value our partnership, Steve. We've come to the end of our time, but do you have any closing remarks for the audience here today?
Well, I just want to thank you for the time, people online as well, and just the opportunity. I hope you see I have a lot of passion and excitement for this. The amazing thing we do at the laboratory, I'm just so proud to have a chance to represent. And partnership is key. None of that stuff is done alone. We can do it by ourselves. You do it somewhere smaller than a national lab. So our partnership with other labs, with academia, with industry is key to our success. And within the community, our partnership with TriDeck and what we do there is really important. We value your support of the laboratory and how we can help you make this a better community for all of us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it, Steve.
Thank you.
And just before we wrap up, we do want to talk about the Donuts and Development. Thanks for everybody for joining us today. Our next one's going to be March 11th, and we'll have all of our city partners from our 4 cities that we work with, talk about development projects that's coming up, and then we'll announce other ones as we go along. I know in July, we're going to have the Federal Reserve Bank of Seattle.
Oh,
It's
cool.
going to be here, so
Are they gonna bring money?
she usually brings shredded money, so make sure you join us here for that one. So shredded money in July. And then, of course, this Thursday is the Tridec annual meeting. So if you haven't got your tickets, buy them now. They're going fast. It's going to be a great event. A little shorter than what we usually have with our economic outlook. We're trying to bring more of that information that we usually have in an all-day session into these Donuts and Development. So thanks again, everybody, for your time. Thanks to those of you that joined us online, and especially thanks, Dr. Ashby.
Thanks all very much.